You do it, it'll turn out okay.
It's
Everyone,
amazing.
talking time with caffeine today, and today we're talking about speciation, and we've had a quite a build up to it. In episode up here, episode 270, we talked about plants. 272, we talked about creatures returning to the water and back again, and back to the water again, and back and forth. Episode 277, natural selection. Episode 277, we talked about our little cousins, the fungi, and at 278, we talked about the homina clade. And now it's all coming together for this presentation.
Homina.
Well, now I feel like you've talked me up, and I can't.
That's what they
compare. I can't match
common.
What I'm supposed to now. All right. So yes, speciation.
Don't put the bar up too high there, Jackson.
No, Lamont's here putting the bar up high. He's like, look, we covered all these top. Now we're bringing them all together. I'm like, look. It was a long day at work.
All right. We'll outdo Jerry Coyne's book, all in one.
I actually ordered that book just the other day, so it should be getting here in the next week or so. So anyway, all right. So I guess we'll screen share because, of course, I made a PowerPoint. Blah blah blah. Nope,
surprise,
not that one.
Surprise.
Oh, just in case, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
All right.
On Nestle, I'm sure you'll be delighted to know that
I was having sound problems.
Finding Truth,
but corrected it.
Finding Truth wants to debate me again.
Oh, on what?
Oh,
does biology inevitably lead one to God? So it should be interesting. Okay, can we see my screen?
Yeah, I think we have some empirical measures on that.
Well, the debate is already disproven by you because you learned about biology and it did not lead to God. So yeah.
Well, Nestle, I'm not there yet. I could become a Frank Turek level theologian by next year. Who knows?
Who knows?
I could forsake everything that I know for money. So
don't go on any roads to Damascus, Jackson.
Or don't hand me a big bag with a $sign on it saying
what about
what
about those godless biologists who died before they converted?
They were just sinning in their hearts, don't you know this? Anyway, all right. So
hey, by the way, do you make that full screen?
It should be full screen. It says I'm sharing.
I'm seeing it. Of course, I'm seeing it along the side as well, which actually is kind of handy to be able to see the PowerPoint windows on the side too.
Speciation.
You can increase the size by removing the bar on top. Like there is an arrow. You can.
I don't think I can do anything from my end.
Let's not press our luck, Nestle.
Yeah, we don't want to try anything too technical. We might. All right. Okay. So first and foremost, I want to start with a quote, one of my favorite quotes from Origin of Species, which will trigger anyone like Jerry Coyne. Quote: many years ago, when comparing and seeing others compare the birds from the separate islands of the Galapagos archipelago, both one with another and with those from the American mainland, I was much struck how entirely vague and arbitrary is the distinction between species and varieties. Close quote. Charles Darwin, Chapter 2, Origin of Species. He has a lot of zingers like that in Chapter 2, which is why I love that chapter so much. Jerry Coyne disagrees heavily, but that's okay.
Yeah. So is that quote been quote mined?
No, Darwin. This does actually reflect Darwin's ideas.
All it being quote mined.
Yeah, well, Darwin. So, Chapter 1 of Origin, as if anyone's unaware, is about Darwin makes an analogy. So he talks about artificial selection. He says, "Look we have cows and chickens and pigeons and all these organisms, and we've bred them. So we are the selecting agent in this case. We take variations that we observe and we pick the ones we like." Chapter 2 is Darwin talking about how extensive variations are between different populations. And he kind of takes on Linnaeus and other naturalists, and he says, hey, look, you guys say there's this many varieties of plants over here, or this many species over here, but nobody can seem to agree on how many species or varieties there are of anything. So, and then of course he went around the world and he studied the Wara in the Falkland Islands, the Galapagos finches, the tortoises, and he said, well, it kind of makes sense. No one can figure it out because they seem like totally arbitrary classifications.
Yeah.
Which, in fairness, they're not totally arbitrary, but
Squishy
there is
boundary.
a degree of yes, there's a squishy
Yeah.
boundary. There's a degree of arbitrarity.
So Darwin came back and he was like, "Oi, there's
I-
a species, there's a species,
Peter-
there's a species problem here." Yeah.
Yes,
And hey, a callback to our selection episode.
I don't think
correct.
Peter or Rosemary Grant, who have studied the Darwin's finches, would have any problem with that Darwin quote. I think they'd go, yeah, pretty much.
Well, and see, I picked on Coin, and maybe it's not entirely fair, but he does say in not in speciation, what's the popular book? Why Evolution is True. There we go. He says in there, oh, species aren't just vague because what is it? The people who live in this area say there are 23 species of birds, and the naturalists say there are 24 species, and that's basically the same. Therefore, and I was like, is that a good argument though? Is it? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I was just like, But anyway, okay. So, but yeah, actually, we will come back to Peter and Rosemary Grant because they will make another appearance later on. So, which shouldn't be surprising to anyone.
Spoiler alert.
So the species concepts. So when we talk about species, we have to define what exactly is. Oh, I forgot to say on the last slide. Was everyone good on the last slide, or do we need to go back?
I think we're good at that. I think
There's
that
a
picture
quote
was
from Darwin. Yeah.
that picture was my thumbnail, so we're good.
That quote was from Darwin. Yes. So the species concept. So when we talk about, well, what on earth is a species? Creationists like to say, oh, well, you don't have any idea what a species is, and when we try to press them for, what is a kind. And in all honesty, I'm kind of okay with that, because here's the difference. To an evolutionist, quotes, all species are related. Whether it's the same species or two different species, they still share a common ancestor. The difference is a kind necessitates there was no common ancestor. So you either have a common ancestor or you don't. Not everything has a common ancestor. That's the major difference. That's why you have to be able to differentiate kinds, but not necessarily species. They're still related. They're very close in their morphology or their niche or whatever.
I'll call back from your baromondology episode.
Indeed. Yeah, this is one of Kent Hovind's favorite tropes. And if I ever have the misfortune to be in a conversation with him again, and he says, oh, you don't know what a species is, I'll say, okay, fine. Now tell me what a kind is.
Be like,
Yeah.
but Jackson, if it can bring forth it's the same kind. That's what you would say.
But it's also just stupid objects because we
Evolutionary point of view.
we already believe that
Darwinian point of
species change
view-
over time, so species are not immutable entities, and from their perspective, kind is an immutable entity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everything is a
Um,
monobaramin, one gigantic monobaramin.
right. Yep, from the original Barrowman was Luca. So
Just reinvent cladistics, but with Hebrew sounding names.
that sounds awful.
If only they could
but the Latin's not
get
much
that
better,
far.
to be fair. So
Yes.
yeah. So the first species concept is arguably the most popular one. This is the biological species concept, which biologist Ernst Mayr coined back in 1942. So he defines a species as a population capable of producing fertile offspring through sexual reproduction. And broadly for like animals and plants usually, and fungi usually, this works decently. Especially for animals, because
Bacteria, totally not.
yeah, no, bacteria definitely not. Lots of protists and things like that. No, definitely not. But for a lot of larger, more complex organisms, typically you're okay with the biological species concept. We'll talk about examples which just kind of fails later.
Well, wait, you don't have sex? Well, you sit over there. We will talk to you later.
Well, even ones who do have sex can cause problems for the biological species concept. Good old Ensatina salamanders. Then the morphological species concept, this is basically the one Linnaeus used because he didn't have genetics and embryology wasn't super a thing yet. So he just kind of looked at their outward morphological characters and was like, okay, this seems to have, these characters, so we'll call this one species, and then this has slightly different ones, so we'll say it's a different species. And that, worked until like the next century, when naturalists from all over the world were like, hey, look at all these new things we found. And then suddenly it doesn't work so much anymore. And it really doesn't, you really need genetics today. It's looking at things based on their morphology alone can lead to some very wrong conclusions.
It's amusing to look up Linnaeus, some of his mistakes. I recently learned he grouped sloths with primates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anthropomorpha, yeah.
And he also put different so-called race
and
as different species of humans. Like it's pretty weird too, yeah.
And we had the bats with the primates too for a while too.
Yep, yeah, it was sloths, bats, and primates were all one group for a while. Yeah, under Linnaeus, I believe. So yeah.
Remember, because the genetics didn't really kick in until the 90s on, any systematics before then, a grain of salt, because there's too much they couldn't have known.
Right, exactly. Phylogenetic or the cladistic species concept, and this one I think is kind of interesting. So this is sort of the evolutionary species concept, which is where basically the population, which so it's the smallest unit of a lineage, which is separate from another, and that's kind of that's a very evolutionary way of looking at it. It's the whole lineage, not just the population.
You can perhaps define it as a population that has a unique common ancestor or an identical ancestor point, maybe even.
Right. Yeah. Right. Which I think that's pretty interesting, but I don't see people using that one a lot, really.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me.
As to cladistics,
Sort of comes in from
difficult to
the
infer.
run.
It's difficult to infer ancestral relationships as opposed to just looking at the characteristics just as it is.
Right. Yeah.
They can delineate individual species in a sense exclusion as they do cladistic analysis, saying that this group here and that group there aren't really closely related because they're phylogenetically distinguished, even though morphological basis or biological interbreeding basis. These are layers that allow the mess, the species thing, to be a little bit clearer.
Right. I do have a question for clarification. That's there. What's the difference between the phylogenetic and cladistic thing?
Ooh,
Nestle, you wanna?
Yeah,
I heard you say ooh, so go ahead.
Nowadays, nothing.
Phylogeny is just the relationships between, the common ancestral relationships between different species.
Okay.
So you and chimpanzees are closer to each other than either other gorillas, and gorillas and chimpanzees and you are closer to each other than orangutans and such. But cladistics is applying phylogeny as a classification system. That's the difference.
Okay.
Yeah, and testing it out and measuring the likelihood of one phylogeny over another, or accounting for the data.
Okay, I didn't know they're two separate trees or something, or the same thing.
That was not the button I wanted to press.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn my camera off
unshare.
because I think I'm starting to have fits.
Yeah.
Can you still see green? You can still see it?
Yeah, no.
There.
You should be able to put your share
can see it
screen
now?
button back.
Yeah,
As it may
see
have
it now.
deactivated.
Can you see it
Yeah,
now?
yeah, it was-
Black.
Okay.
yeah, the camera's off.
There we go.
Yeah,
Species concept.
Yeah, I have my camera off because I'm
Okay.
eating. I feel like
Oh, that's fine.
probably
I just
rude and like had the whole camera like
my
watch me eat.
my internet is Louisianian, so I'm just gonna go with my camera off.
Louis.
All right.
Yeah.
So then the final one,
Yeah.
ecological
then
species
that-
concept.
Very interesting. Number 4.
Yes, the ecological species concept. So, a population of organisms adapted to a specific niche. So, if you're looking at, say, maybe a couple of morphologically similar populations, maybe one of them is doing a slightly different job in the environment than the other one is, and on that basis, some ecologists might say, okay, we're justified in calling them different species because they're unlikely to interbreed because they're doing different things in the environment. Or something along those lines.
But like I have maybe a maybe stupid objection to this fourth concept, because like if you have if you have two very distantly related species who have almost the identical ecology, then convergent evolution, like now you have like maybe a convergent species in this regard.
Well, sure. Or I think this one could also be used for like bacteria.
Would assume that they would be the same species if they are that distant. The reason I think that each one of them is interesting is that they overlap. They involve different. So the biological species concept is what links with what. The morphological species is what does it look like, the surface features particularly, and perhaps then the developmental and observe with a microscope level. And then the genetic is trying to sort out a bunch of data that's going to include all of those different layers to be able to work out workable phylogeny, is reminding you that there are adaptations involved, which ultimately are genetic and involve a whole bunch of factors as well that add into the mix.
Right. Exactly. So really, when biologists are determining species, you're not using any one of these in particular. You would evaluate all of their characteristics, or at least as many as you can, to determine whether there are separate species is what. So, on this
one. Look good so far.
So we're good? Okay.
Now
All
we
right,
get to
so
the
we're gonna
fun
move on.
stuff.
I was wondering whether you have changed the slide or not, because I don't see any change. So, now I do.
Yes.
No, okay. So now I'm. Yep. So we should move on to new one. All right.
Your mic is going out.
Yeah, you're breaking up projection to me too. Robot voice.
Robot Jackson.
Robot voice. Sorry,
Curse
Jackson.
Louisiana internet. Yeah, if you can still hear me, I'll try to channel Jackson. Is that you got the two dynamics about species that basically turn A into B. That's your sympatric mode, where when you're done, you have the same population has morphed into a new species that would be distinct if you could time travel and try to interbreed them. Allopatric speciation, one where a species expands over a larger and larger range to the point where it basically can fission off a new species, while the original one may still be in operation. And the sympatric mode was kind of the cliche of what Darwin did. The allopatric mode, that's very much Ernst Mayr's baby.
Yeah, you cut out, yeah.
Yep. So I channeled you as best I could.
I cut out. I'm sorry. Like I said, Louisiana has terrible internet. I apologize. Yes, thank you, RJ. If I just go off in the middle of a sentence, I'm gone. Right. Yes.
Wait for you to return,
going,
though.
sorry.
We have hope. We just don't want dead
or
air.
keep going, RJ.
Yeah,
Can you guys
and
hear
so these are the polarities. The sympatric speciation thing applies much more so in microorganisms, in vertebrates and the like, whereas vertebrates and large seem to operate, especially ones that are terrestrial, terrestrial, tend to operate a bit more in that metric mode. And so if you go back and look at debates about speciation issues from the 70s and 80s, they were kind of thrashing that out. For a while, allopatric seemed to be like everything, and the poor sympatric mode got shunted aside. But as we move into the 21st century, you start seeing more papers that are saying, well, no, actually, there's still some sympatric speciation going on, even in vertebrates.
Yeah, it's like the main difference is like the common, or at least I just think that the common element of speciation is like a type of genetic isolation. Hello? Oh, Jackson,
yeah.
Did you check out again?
We got a hello from you.
Can you hear me? I think like it's like I was listening to RJ, and then I think maybe his internet dropped out.
No.
Oh, well, Ness dropped in, but we're hearing you now, Jackson.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Everybody.
If I like fall off at any point, it's because my literally given out. I just
yeah.
In addition.
Maybe you should share your slideshow with the others.
We also, so I think we should just spend a moment talking about.
Oh no!
Yeah, it's actually a fair point. I'm gonna RJ. Yeah. I'm gonna email it to you. How about that?
Oh, wow.
RJ.
An email because I were around to get my email.
Okay, I'm gonna email it to you.
You can email me too. I might maybe better if I'm hosting the.
Yeah. Email to Vandalen. Let Lamont put it up. Yeah. Because master of the rule, probably it's a better circumstance. Oh, by the way, while we're waiting to happen, I'll just say to Atheist Junior, you might want to say a post Nephilim rather than.
So while we're waiting for the slideshow to be mailed to me, how was your debate last night? Can you hear us?
Atheist.
How was whose debate?
AJ had debated Neff last night.
Atheist debated Neff.
Can you hear us?
Oh, I didn't realize we got another
dinosaurs and people.
Like you're moving very slowly.
Can you hear us?
Am I hearing silence?
Raise your hand.
Is it just me?
Yeah, now I can. I had to
no,
hear
it's
my
just
headphones.
silence.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
I hear you.
I caught substantial bits of your debate with him, and particularly Nephilim was rolling out the tropes. You were trying to drag him off, and it was the usual. And how did you feel doing it?
Well, I felt. I think I was sweating blood by the end. It was pretty. No, it was enjoyable, but it was like a 2-hour debate, and talking to Nephilim Free for 2 hours straight is stressful for anybody.
Oh yeah.
But did you notice that at one point he was listing supposed modern birds like flamingos that were found alongside like Cretaceous fossils, and he said hummingbird.
I have not watched the debate, but I can
judge. He puts
instead of humming
on the wrong syllables a lot.
I remember
Australopithecines.
Like I also remember specifically, like I talked to Nephilim Free a few years ago, and he back then he claimed about owls existing in the Cretaceous. I asked him for a reference, but he just outright refused to give it to me, and I just looked up
what
myself,
you got,
and I found out that
modern bird groups have lineages that go back that far, but the individual species goes back that far.
Oh no,
right.
It turns out ours didn't get any close to the Cretaceous, so I looked it up, and it turned out that there was a fossil species of a non-avian dinosaur that used to be considered an owl, but was corrected like decades ago. So he He was like
Right.
out of date for like
Well,
a few decades.
yeah.
Yeah,
And of course,
I don't know if
pulling
you know
sources
the
out of
original.
Nephilim free.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, the original debate was supposed to be Kent Hovind versus Dr. Dan round 2 about the flood, but of course, Kent, backed out or had technical difficulties again for the second time.
Technical
So I
difficulties,
accepted the
yeah.
debate with 3 hours notice. So I had about 3 hours to prepare.
yeah, I've heard. I'm not positive, but I heard that off topic kind of. But Neff is no longer the bottom of the barrel of creationist debaters now. Other people have took his place as the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, he makes standing for truth seem erudite.
I agree. If he's not at the bottom, I'm not sure who is, except for maybe Mr. Batman.
Oh, yeah. Well, having debated with Batman, even more so than Nephilim, Batman will just go ballistic and weird, and pretty soon he's off on pedophile issues, and it's just like whack-a-loon territory. Nephilim can stay kind of on topic.
Yeah, at least you don't get the outright homophobia with Nephilim. But it was interesting because at the end of the debate, James, the moderator, actually started sort of going off on Neff for not providing a source because somebody, bought a super chat asking Nephilim for his source, and he started complaining, saying that, this person, just blah 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 wants to. Saying that he wanted a source for malicious reasons or to make him look bad. And James was like, well, what if this person just wants to look into this information further? You're, applying motives to them asking for the source. And I said that, this person spent money to ask you for the source.
I know. I suspect that most of the time Nephilim can't provide a source because he's just gleaned crap without ever marking down where he gets stuff. So he can't even necessarily find the secondary website, and then didn't bother to check to see if the secondary website. So he's just floating way clear of source base all the time.
Will Jackson return, or like I don't know?
Even with a reference.
Maybe it's right. Maybe it's. I think he might be checking his internet. His internet's bad right now.
Crap.
Have
you received the slides yet or no?
I'm checking my mail. I haven't got anything yet, but you are, Jay.
Louisiana is the Texas electric grid of internet.
Oh.
Yeah, that's but what are you familiar with the carving that it's from the outside of some sort of it's a relief, and it's supposedly like a stegosaurus, Cambodia? But it's really just Cambodia more of like that was the one. And I told him that it was an animal standing in front of a plant.
In fact, all of the cartouches that were done would put a thing up in them, and then they filled in the space with little decorative flower motifs. It's found in a lot of stuff.
Right.
And if you pull away that supposed stegosaur trim, it's most probably some form of hog that was being actually depicted, which is native to the area. But Nephilim just accepts this. He was pulling out all the Paluxy Glen Rose man tracks. That's the bottom of the barrel. All the major creationist organizations have shied away from that stuff. So bringing it up at all means he's still stuck in the Karl Bach Kent Hovind level of, well, this is true no matter what.
Right. And he was accusing me of, I predicted that you would bring up this argument of radiometric dating when he's bringing up the oldest trick in the book arguments, and radiometric dating is perfectly valid to bring up in order to prove the KT boundary, to prove the extinction of dinosaurs.
Yeah,
I think. I don't. Yeah. Who cares if you predicted Jackson that?
So what? An extensive section on the weird dating techniques and data selection regarding specifically the Grand Canyon that Austin and Snelling and that did. You started looking at the actual data, you realize there ain't a mystery there.
Okay.
Okay, so all you have to do is to get down to the fourth slide, which was the one where he left off, that was discussing mechanisms, and then we need to get Jackson back, or I can pretend to be Jackson for the next slides.
Well, I don't mind sort of dunking on Nephilim free until Jackson gets back. I'm having fun.
Oh, that's true.
Well,
Well,
I mean,
everyone needs a hobby, and that's an one.
Yeah. I was excited to be in a stream with, you, RJ, Jackson, and Ness, because one of my favorite videos on all of YouTube is when you guys talk to a bit of Orange on stream. It's frustrating to watch, but I've probably seen that like 5 or 6 times. Yeah, it's just a fun video for me. Like, it's so ridiculous, that stream, but it's a good watch.
Well, in any debating context, there are 2 main things to deal with. One is that you know your own database well, and that you've technically studied their database well. And if you've got that under your belt, the odds that your opponent is going to be suddenly novel, or they're going to try to wing something. So most of the time you're going to be able to respond effectively because they don't repeat. They repeat their arguments over and over and over again. Kent Hovind is actually an easy target because he's not very original. Once in a while, you get the wackaloons that will be riffing off of some really obscure creationist trope, or something that's really, really recent. So if you keep your fingers on the pulse of cutting creationism, the stuff that's being put on the list YouTubers that's making through the rumor mill on Twitter, that can keep you up to speed on that end, in which case you're covered. I debated quite a few people so far, and most of the time it's ones where I've been dragooned into it and I go, fine, I have no problem with that. I know this subject. I don't need to bone up on it.
Yeah, I had a good 2 weeks to prepare for my debate with Kent Hovind, and that gave me a lot of time to anticipate his arguments. But with this debate, I really didn't have much time to prepare, and I wish I would have had enough time to watch this video by Aaron Ra called Flintstones Archaeology, because it literally covers just about everything that Nephilim brought up in terms of images of supposed dinosaur art that humans had created, like every single one. So I wish I would have had time to watch that.
In the Second Rocks Were There book, because it's relating to all this weird pseudo-archaeology evidence. There's even one little trope that's knocked around, and ICR even wrote a piece on it, where they were claiming that Leonardo da Vinci literally was painting a picture of a live dragon at one point. And when you actually looked at the material, because I thought, probably not in the 1500s. And it turned out that he was being commissioned to dragon pictures for a patron. And he was explaining in some of his books how he made up the stuff, how he concocted, here's a bit from a reptile, and here's a thing from that, and that looks like a good idea. And he was doing the how-to of how to do a plausible dragon picture based on what the patron was going to pay money for.
Yeah, sometimes you almost feel bad debunking the creationist claims, because that sounds pretty cool. I almost want that to be true. And it's like, the same thing I said in my debate, them living together.
This monster being a plesiosaur. Any paleontologist would just sell their grandmother to find a population of plesiosaurs living in Loch Ness. They would be delighted with it. Erica would probably be first on the plane if they could find a population of big feet living in North America that you could actually study. Every one of these things would be absolutely momentous scientifically. But the problem is that everybody that puts forward these things are so credulous and stupid that you immediately go, you better look into that first.
Or Lucy living in Cambodia. I've heard that from Ken Hovind. Lucy species.
Yeah.
But the examples of the dinosaurs depictions, these all come from one website. Like there's a whole list of one website that shows these things.
Yeah.
But of course, you go over each one of them, and
Phil
they don't really fit.
Has done scads of very scathing postings online and also in various publications where they've investigated what the actual reality is. And there was just a recent study. Again, we're going to be citing all of this material in the new book, because there was one famous site down in the Southwest USA that was supposedly an example of a sauropod, and it turns out it was just a picture of the carvings, that when they analyzed what the carvings or the picture paintings actually involved, they aren't even a single image. There are a bunch of different images that had gotten mistakenly treated together, and the guys would draw an outline around it all to make it seem to be what it wasn't. But they've done new analyses on this, so they're getting farther and farther behind the fact curve.
All right, so Jackson said we can probably continue without him because he's right now using phone data. His internet is dead.
Well, I'll be happy to wing it. And Nestle, you can jump in as well on the matter. I think we pretty much dealt with the basics of the allopatric sympatric issue.
There are a few things that are still to be discussed in this.
Right?
Good, go with it, Nes.
Like actually, like one thing that I want to say also, like a common mode or a common element of speciation is some form of genetic isolation, and like physical distance between populations is one obvious way to generate genetic isolation, and that is why, of course, why allopatric species is often seen to be as the more common mode of speciation than sympatric speciation without any physical distance between them.
The fancy term pre-zygotic isolation pops up a lot, and it was studied at enormous length with fruit flies because they breed quickly and they can be done in a laboratory. And so what you've got is that the thing where males and females in a population become isolated from one another, it doesn't happen like a light switch. It can occur between groups of female versus males in one group, or males versus females in a separate grouping, to gradually become more isolated to where you no longer have fertile offspring. And the amount of genetic work on this has been going on literally for like 40, 50 years. It's not something that was just popped out of the box.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there are ways for genetic isolation to happen without any physical distance, and there is one image on the bottom right that neatly shows this. It shows one way of whole genome duplication. When you we have 2 copies of our genomes, but there are organisms that can have 4, 6, 12, etc. copies of the genome.
Yeah.
And when you when one individual duplicates its genome, then it can also not be, but it can become isolated as a result of this genome duplication, because any hybrid between a duplicated genome and a normal genome will generate an odd number of genome copies, and that will most likely result in sterility.
Now, I've heard about talking about sympatric real fast. I think I saw some videos about this before. Could that be like, like say different language, like saying like animals or animals, they say different languages or something, like, or a different song for a bird, and the bird, like for sexual selection, for example, and the birds tweet aren't like the other bird likes. It won't like, no, I'm not mating with you, guy. You sound terrible. Even though
and this can happen involving even the time of day. There will be insects where one cluster of the insect will get a shift to where it starts mating at a different day than the others. And that, even though genetically they're virtually identical, there's everything morphologically, ecologically, they're indistinguishable from one another, except they're becoming isolated populations because of that timing shift. I was
watching this this Netflix documentary, and it was talking about the mating ritual of some bird that lives in the rainforest, and the male he'll be expecting the female to come, and so he has to clean up his sort of area of leaves and has to be completely spick and span, and then he does this elaborate dance when she gets there where he fans out his back feathers like a peacock, and if the dance doesn't live up to her expectations, she's not going to mate with him. It was pretty funny, honestly.
Yeah, this is a much more interesting issue. Darwin got a lot of heat, even from Alfred at the time, about the fact that he was suggesting that sexual selection could play a role along with nature. And sex, oh dear, no. But now that we're in the 21st century, they can realize that it's a hot issue, as in the sexual selection aspect. Who's doing the selecting? the idea that it's not merely the power of the male to be to show how fit it is by superfluously large features that it can sustain, or how big of a dance it can do, and all of that, but also whether or not there's just a preference on the part of the female. And so now we get into some really interesting little side issues on it. Lamont had asked me for some technical papers to put forward. And I'll mention that all involve incipient speciation, and some of them are in fruit flies, and some of the papers, and they're all open access, they'll relate to the like a gene that's been lost in the process of incipient speciation. And so all of that will give insights as to the backstory of the chemistry and biology and genetics that underlying that speciation process.
Yeah, those 3 links are in the description below if you want to check them out. Click away. But
yeah, all of them open access. I think PNAS in one, and then the molecular biology and evolution in another, and I think one's from I forget which ones are which.
Yeah, I said about this up in the last second episode, but someone said once that natural selection is what you do until you get old enough to use sexual selection.
Well, then, and in previous opportunities, we've discussed that bit about asexuality, that sexual reproduction has a fitness cost to it, and that's a lot of work over the generations to figure out why is it so popular apart from it being fun. And so you've got the matter that there are advantages to sexual reproduction, as Nestle can elaborate on if he wishes, about the fact that it shuffles the genome more rapidly than a lot of parasites can keep up. And so there's a huge advantage to that, but that overwhelms the fitness cost through the rigmarole of sexual reproduction. And it's no coincidence that aphids and other asexual species will invariably have some way, whether it's bacterial symbionts or their particular ecology, that's insulating them from potential parasites and that, to where asexuality can kick back in as it does in aphids.
It seems that the preference of sexual reproduction is correlated with an ever-changing environment. Like if the environment is stable, those species that can switch between both will often prefer to just clone themselves. But when there is like a sudden change, where there is a high stress, maybe even diseases and such, then they will often switch to sexual reproduction. And it is also the idea of the Red Queen hypothesis, if I recall the name correctly. It's basically saying like, you need to run. You need to run how fast you can just to stay in the same place.
Yeah, it's an illusion, a reference to Alice in Wonderland about the queen that, and it was a chessboard analogy. The whole bloody story was based on a chess game.
I think there is a lot more to the reason why sex exists, and I recommend Nick Lane's The Vital Question for that, because this is a really interesting book to go into.
Yeah, and it's connected up to membrane cell interactions. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's really just popped up. I did a video on it a couple of years ago where I tried to review a lot of the material on that, and anybody who wants to look through my field can locate that. And I guess if we finish with the modes of speciation, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Well, actually, we have a question about about what's the difference between the 2 pictures here on the bottom?
One's looking at organisms, and the other is looking actually at the chromosome level inside the cell.
Okay, so like the pre or post zygotic barrier stuff.
Yeah, the one on the left could have umpteen different explanations as to what was going on. That the 2 groups, the little brownie bugs versus the green bugs, could be because of an ecological adaptation, a predator-prey relationship, a particular genetic shift. There's a bunch of reasons why those 2 isolations could occur.
I think the picture on the left is just a generic way of visualizing speciation. Like, you have one population, and then it's split in 2, and then over time they will become increasingly more different, and then eventually they won't be able to, or they just won't, for whatever reason, they won't be, they won't interbreed anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like
it looks to me like they're being separated by a river. And
maybe
yeah.
that's the case. Yeah, maybe the case.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's Blue Spaghetti.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The role of blue spaghetti is not properly appreciated in population genetics.
Well, yeah, and then you can see on the right we have red and green spaghetti as well.
Exactly, yes. And as we know, red and green mix to make a completely different color, and they come in, and it's just, it's just a terrible. Dogs and cats living together.
And the other one, the genetic one, is like what shows why, say, horses and donkeys can breed, or lions and tigers can breed, but they can have babies, but their babies can have babies.
Yeah, and at that point,
I think you get a mule
above the genetic level.
It has to do with I think it's partially because the number of chromosomes are different. Like if the number of chromosomes are different, then they can, like, you can have a hybrid, but when you have when the hybrid produces new gametes, like eggs or sperm, there needs to be a meiosis process to happen. And the chromosome, like when the chromosomes don't align properly because of the different number of chromosomes, then things can go wrong, and then you have sterile as a result.
And there would be technical literature that's been done exploring at the detail level what exactly is GLIT, why certain species will hybrid male to female, but not in the other, and that that chromosome level again is the pure ATCs and Gs of the genetic code. Ooh, and now there's this. We're now at the point where Jackson would have had enormous advantage by knowing more about the various species names that he had put up.
Oh, he's good at that. He's very good at that.
Oh, he just has this stuff at his fingertips and mouth that I stumble on it. That's Procambarus virginalis and just pseudo obscura. That's the famous fruit flies. So the other is a bird, I'm sure, and we got big bird hybrid of Geospiza. Oh, that's the Darwin finches. Yeah,
it's a big bird.
So I never knew.
Procambarus, that must be a little shrimpy thing down in the lower left corner.
Yeah, I never knew Darwin studied Sesame Street.
Yes, it's can't pronounceus.
Yeah, it's all that damn Greek and Latin stuff.
Have you heard anything new from Jackson, from Dahlia?
Nope. Only his
I think he's listening on his phone. I think he's got no.
Yeah, it's when things go bad there in Louisiana on the internet, it goes bad. Didn't know Louisiana had steamed Wi-Fi, did you?
No, maybe
anyway.
Get their.
So these would be 3 direct examples of speciation process on the fly, especially in the case of the birds. The grants have been, Peter and Rosemary have been doing decades of work. You can find zillions of their papers at proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and others. And the artificial speciation bit, Diane Dodd's fruit fly lab work in 1989. It's not easy to spur an organism into an artificial speciation because organisms are really pesky. There's an inertia and structure to a breeding population, and you can produce some artificial selection things to spur it on, but it's really, really tough to. And it's one of the reasons why when we look at artificial selection in organisms, that basically what you get is a bunch of varieties within the species, going back a deeper level of structure to a species. And that's the thing that Jerry Coyne would be bringing up, that species are squishy, but yet there's also kind of an internal organization to them that's not easy to nudge, at least not fast enough to do it very often.
Yeah, the Grants did a 10-year-long study just on the thickness of beaks, comparing wet and dry years, and you could see the graph they made where the thickness of the beak goes up and down just by 1/10 of a millimeter, but the pattern of it is very even. And I've seen Kent Hovind talk about this where he misinterprets it, saying, "Oh, it only increased by 1/10 of a millimeter." And I'm thinking, it's not about that; it's about the pattern. And I want to ask him if it's only increasing by 1/10 of a millimeter, and that's not evidence of evolution, how thick would the bird's beak have to be before you would call it evidence?
And the thing is that you have definite species that are different species.
Yeah,
they're not interbreeding in the wild. They're distinct species, but to get from one to the other only would require tiny microevolutionary shifts. And that's what has made the Grants work so incredibly important, is because they're there every bloody year. So they're able to observe all the little microevolutionary wiggles within a whole population to see all of that live. Because as Coyne once said about, I think it was Stephen Jay Gould, that you could stare at a tree of speciating bees your entire life and you would not necessarily see the speciation event because it's too slow. If something is happening over the period of thousands of years, it's not all you're going to see are tiny microevolutionary wiggles at the individual population level, which is what you can see.
So the big thing real fast. So the beaks change back and forth depending on the weather. But say if they went off to another island and that island was raining all the time and the other island was dry all the time and stuff, and the beak thing kept constant, that's like a speciation event.
Yeah. And especially if they became isolated long enough to where the mechanisms are such that they won't actively interbreed, even if you bring them together. That's another one. He probably has a slide coming up here on ring species. If he does, we can come. If not, we can come back to it at some later point.
I can cover like the fruit fly example like real quick. Like as you mentioned, in most species, speciation will be very slow, too slow to observe in our lifetime, and that is why. You have the example of the experiment with fruit flies, because they can reproduce really, really fast, and you can observe results fairly quickly. Like in this specific example, you see a fruit fly population split into two, and they were given different food sources. I don't remember which food they got, but they are different. And then over time, you have a preference of mating for some reason. I think it has to do with like the gut bacteria, like depending on the food source, the fruit fly will develop different gut microbiome. And that's somehow
that's another issue that's only just been appreciated in the last 15 years.
And that's somehow having a different gut microbiome somehow influences their mate preference, and they will only mate preferentially with the
and the gut microbes can in effect be manipulating the organism to different things to propagate itself more efficiently. Right. Now the creationist is going to say, and they do inevitably, well, it's still a bird, it's still a fly, it's still a shrimp, it hasn't changed any. And that's where the spirit of Aaron Ra would be jumping in. Of course, that all big scale changes involves really, really, really slow processes that consist of microevolutionary speciation events, but individual speciation events can't possibly generate a big macroevolutionary jump. We would never expect it to and don't need it to.
And the fruit flies versus, say, it's why we can't, probably, unfortunately, why we can't see a speciation event in, say, elephants who take 2 years to have babies.
Yeah.
Fruit flies that taste.
So if we're all good with this screen, we can go to the next slide.
About the crayfish on the left, that's one of the favorite examples of Jackson Reed. And if I remember correctly, this particular crayfish, there was one species who just it could normally reproduce sexually, but then I think there was a genome duplication or something else. I don't remember the specifics, but then you have like one individual who now can only clone itself. It cannot reproduce anymore with the ancestral population. It can only clone itself, and now you have like an entire new asexual species of crayfish.
And we should also point out that in these examples, and virtually all examples of speciation in the wild and in the laboratory, none of it is done by anti-evolutionists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the slide said
there's no sweat equity there.
Oh, my favorite
rates of speciation. Yes. Yeah, this is one of the, in many ways, one of the giant tempests in a teapot that plagued the field for quite some time. Phyletic gradualism is the nice, good old-fashioned Richard Dawkins style super gradual speciation and at a stately pace, which was the general idea that the rates are fairly constant over time. Now, punctuated equilibrium has often been contrasted to this, as was the people proposing it, Gould and Eldridge. But in some ways, it's not that big of a different thing. The idea that speciation can occur rapidly, often through allopatric processes, geographic isolation, but that speciation events are punctuated then by long periods of stasis, so that instead of thinking of the speciation phenomenon dragged out over an extremely long period of time, as you can see on the picture, the Y picture on the left, you see it occurring much more rapidly. But by rapidly, they're still talking like thousands of years. And that when you're thinking about the rates of things, that when I would read the literature between punctuated equilibrium proponents and critics and allopatric speciation versus sympatric and all the things, I put a whole bunch of sources on that in the punctuated equilibrium thing I did for my tip work, that there really wasn't much disagreement about the rate of speciation at the speciation event level. It's basically what happens to it kind of after that, to where it settles in relatively stable mode. And so this was a big contentious thing in the 1990s and earlier, and it's much less controversial today because we've moved on and we have a finer resolution of data.
Yeah, I helped writing a script for Jackson Reed for a video called, I think it's called Stasis, and there we discuss this topic in more in depth. It's also conflates with the whole concept of like living fossil, because there's nothing changes when species are in stasis. But no, even species in stasis can still change, but they just change relatively slowly, and then you have short periods, or as RJ said, you have short periods of like rapid changes.
Yeah, and there is an example I cited. We cited it in The Rocks Were There because I think it's such a delicious one, and I mentioned it in my tip work, that there are some little foraminifera that actually had a multiple speciation event over the same period. That one of the population ranges, and I can't remember whether it was the equatorial or the temperate group, but one of them fissioned off in a punctuated rapid mode by comparison to the slower a sympatric mode that was occurring on the other. So you had two speciation events for the price of one. And the only reason why you can follow that at that level is because these little things are generating huge bodies of organisms that are dropping dead in their little shells, drop down and get fossilized. So you have over the periods of millions of years, a really detailed layer on layer on layer record of these things. And so it's no surprise that some of the nicest examples of punctuated equilibrium and microevolutionary speciation stuff come up from those things because you have such a fossil record for them.
Well, creationists complain about, we only see examples of microevolution, but we can get a whole lot done with just micro, Yeah,
well, it's the argument. I can't possibly walk to Chicago from New York because I can only walk at like an inch per hour.
Yeah, I've seen someone walk 10 feet, but nobody can walk 10 miles. That's just simply not possible.
I can't do that at all. I walk out to at the edge of my driveway. That means I can't walk to the airport. Au contraire, I have done that.
I've walked 10 miles before down a bike trail in the wintertime.
And this is all that recurring problem of scale, both in terms of what's going on temporally at any given time, and then what's going on in time over long periods of time that invariably every anti-evolutionist, their just brain seizes up on this.
So but the truth is about these charts. Really, the truth is that the built-in charts are the same. Like the charts are combined together in reality.
Yeah, in some respects, the phyletic gradualism bunch were not always dealing with fossil data. It's no coincidence that a lot of the people, John Maynard Smith and Richard Dawkins and that, weren't paleontologists. Whereas, and Ernst Mayr technically wasn't a paleontologist. All Gould and Eldridge did, because they were paleontologists. They realized that if you took allopatric speciation by geographic isolation, as a dominant mode, which has been confirmed by various works since, in vertebrates, that's going to produce a punctuated appearance in the fossil record, that you're going to see species A and then it kind of disappears and then it's replaced by species B, when in fact the distribution of that was species A had fissioned off species B, and species A may still have been alive over in the next county, but you just didn't have enough of a geographic range able to pick all of that up, because the fossil record just doesn't work that way. It's not that detailed.
Yeah, and also I think too that I might be wrong here, of course, that the gradual one does exist genetically, but until it makes a physical change that fossilizes, we don't know it's different species until it appears in the fossil records again.
The only way you would identify a new species is if it had become morphologically so distinct. And what can easily happen in the fossil record is that a species A can fission off B in a quick punctuated mode, but they're very similar to one another. And then the B or the A goes off and modifies over time. Technically, genetically, it's still the same species. It's a sympatric phenomenon. And the one that looks the same might actually be classified as a completely different species if you knew its genetics. So we can see every example of that in the living world. And so the cartoon of the left chart versus the right chart is just that, a cartoon. The lines will never be as steep as they seem to be on the left side, and they're never as flat in reality as what appears to be the case on the right side. They're just simplifying the concepts for the purpose of it, but nature is much more intricate than that.
Yeah, I think this is one reason why Kent Hovind, never wants to talk about fossils, because with his definition of kinds, it's just animals that can bring forth or can reproduce. But, you can't apply that species concept to fossils, because we have to study the morphology. We don't know whether or not, this species of reptile and closely related, similar looking reptile could interbreed. We just go by the morphology, so, but with kinds,
I've got the perfect answer to him. He will invariably say that you can't prove that any fossil ever had babies. And my reply to him is, oh, but Kent, every one of those fossils had parents. And it's that failure to think about the lineage of parentage that, to be fair, poor Kent is way too low on the food chain to ever work this out. The best he could do would be to try to siphon off the latest baraminology work, but that's way above his analytical skill set. He's stuck in the 1980s in terms of what creationism has been up to. But even if he were to try to do that, they're not going to help him much, because the baraminologists have ended up accepting huge amounts of speciation at rates radically faster than what we're seeing here in these charts.
What did you see any of my new video I made about Kent, where it's about the Chlamydomonas algae, and I sort of put together a compilation of every time this has been brought up to Kent, and he keeps saying, "Oh, I'll look into this. I'll read this paper. I'm going to research this," but he never does. And each time he acts like he's hearing
the bit of him that Heron work has been pointed to him so much, and Volvox and all of that material, that he's just a lazy bastard. Let's just face it. This is a guy that if you see him, the vast majority of the material of a Kent Hovind lecture is crap that he has compiled way back in the 1980s and 90s. And that's why you can see so many slides that have like 1982 references on them.
Well,
jokes about Bill Clinton.
I actually suspect it might not just be laziness. He might be doing it deliberately because he doesn't want to learn.
Oh well, he is.
Yeah,
They're not mutually exclusive. He is a lazy, superficial, arrogant bastard. He's the Donald Trump of creationism, as I've called him.
Yeah.
As I quoted my quote I made in AJ's video, la la la, I'm not listening. La la la, I'm not listening.
Yeah.
And that's Kent Hovind's style, and he's never going to change. He hasn't changed within my lifetime. I've been watching him longer than either of you have been alive, so I know that the circumstances of just how not evolving that poor schlub is. There are other creationists that do kind of adapt and alter, and so you've got the ones, Jensen and others, who are accepting transitional fossils in creationism now, and you're going, huh? But Kent is not at that level. Anyway. So we've got the, I'll do a shameless plug. At my website, you can find 1.3, which is a catalog of Creation is Stupid on that punctuated equilibrium issue. And there's a bunch of technical citations in there that will fill you up to speed on the technical argument on punctuated equilibrium, how it's been accepted in the sciences and all that stuff. So it's a resource that you can draw on, and it's quite up to date on that, to which you can discover that creationists will not discuss punctuated equilibrium, even if they bring it up themselves.
And
if they understand it at all.
Which most of them don't, by the way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the end of the slideshow. Jackson only has 6 slides.
Oh, okay. Well, then Nestling and I can attack the interesting issue of ring species. And this is an interesting conceptual one, because if you think about species that have function, I'm gonna run the risk of putting my camera on and crashing, because I do it visually by name. Let's see if that works. Come on, there we go. Okay. I'm gonna test to see. I think his reaction time is way too slow, so I'll keep the camera off.
The camera is really shaky. I don't see any movement. Yeah.
I'll have to.
Is mine
okay?
Hit the wrong.
Is mine? Am I lagging?
Anyway.
Okay.
No. Yeah. Slow. But anyway, imagine in your head, kind of. No, fine. You've got fancy computers.
Yeah, I wanted to show off this new mic arm that I got.
Thought experiment. You have a population of and a population B that. So you have interbreed, and then you have a new C, and it will interbreed with B just fine. And then you got a D next to C, and it will interbreed with C just fine. Now, if species were nice and tidy, where anything in the species will interbreed with any in the species, hence its species, and anything that won't be a separate species, then you can go A to B, B to C, C to D, and predict that A and D will be able to interbreed all the same species. However, in life, there's salamanders and herring that if you try to interbreed the A, you find out, oopsie, they won't interbreed. What needs to happen is that interconnecting lock of the B's and C's can disappear. Suddenly you've got 2 separate species without anything changing in the organism.
Say like the B goes extinct, but the A and C are still around, but the A and C can't. The A could be the B and C, but the A and C can't get together.
Yeah, and so trying to define what a speciation event is in those contexts is very interesting, because it's something where the D is not isolated neighbors; it's only isolated from its distant neighbor.
Also, Jackson Witte often points out that the original concept of the ring species doesn't really exist, because the original concept is more like it's a smooth gradient, the original concept. But often touted examples in real life, the ring species are more like different populations which are discretely different from each other. But of course, it forms a ring nonetheless, sort of. But yeah. But I want to.
Spoiler alert! Nature is complicated.
Yeah, there is no ideal example for ring species, but It's getting late for me, so I'm going to head out. I just want to share something that I found recently about a recent paper. Let's see if I can screen share it. Then I will leave because I cannot keep my eyes open anymore because it's getting very late for me.
Nestle has tossed a lot of interest my way over the years. I want to give a nod to you.
Let's see here. How can I screen share? I'm not used to this program, but
yeah, it's totally different from on the bottom. It's totally different from StreamYard.
Yeah, there should be a window right in the middle of next to the little television set with the arrow and next to the camera thing.
Yeah, but unfortunately,
all icons are in Martian.
StreamYard hates RJ, so I use Restream.
Yes, I am the bane of StreamYard. That if I try to if it's just one or two people in it, it's not too bad. If there's way 6, 7, 8, I'm doomed. Ooh, rapid speciation.
Yeah, I believe
isolation.
I believe RJ said I had a fancy computer. I have $100 Chromebook, sir. Just saying.
This is
okay. We can maybe still ahead of me.
Okay.
Female isolation, yes, that's very pertinent to the idea that in sexual selection, it's more than just the male doing things. You know, the female is playing an active role, and frankly, there was a degree of sexism in as to not wanting to think about that aspect of it, because like you argue that like women have choices. I mean, really? But yeah. So we moved on.
This is a very neat example because this is a group of birds called, if I pronounce the name correctly, cappuccino seed eaters, or a group of South American birds, and they all live in the same area, but they are only distinguishable by the males, the plumage of the males. So that's the only difference. The females are all the same of each species, but the males are different. And there's also only a few differences with regard to a few genes, and it turns out that the mate choice between the plumage and also the song that the males use to attack the females, that sexual selection is enough to basically differentiate these species over time, and this is what the paper shows here. Although you cannot, it's unfortunately not an open access paper, but you can still look up more stuff in the pop science articles below. In these links.
And the odds are, wait a while, like mark it down and then come back to it next year. There's probably good odds that one of the professors will have put it up on their website, or it'll be available open access somewhere else. So an awful lot of that comes up. There are many ways to find out a lot of these, and even good summaries that can get you a lot of the interesting. Now, remember the lineage of birds, that therefore it's not reasonable to think that an awful lot of dinosaur species would have been governed by very similar phenomenon, especially among feathered dinosaurs.
Okay, so someone in the chat says that you admitted that the globe Earth is a religion, atheist, Junior.
Yeah, they asked.
Kim Henriksen is an idiot.
They asked if getting the vaccine meant that NASA was, if using the vaccine brainwashed people into believing the globe Earth religion, and I facetiously said that, oh well, I have already gotten both of my vaccines, and I already believed in the globe Earth religion before that.
Of course, but you cannot expect.
Yeah, Kenny it gives atheist.
Yeah, so yes,
bad name, because even by his standards, he makes Nephilim free seem like a scholar.
Yeah, so I'm not being sarcastic. I definitely think that thinking the Earth is round is a religion, and I'm not being sarcastic, Kenny.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. If
wink,
I mean, Kenny
nudge,
either
guys.
has the attention of a gnat. Kenny has the attention span of a gnat, or has to consciously get all of that he's been dumped on for the stupid puts into things. He never offers sources. He believes in extreme young Earth creationism. He's just a silly dit that thing anywhere.
And the most dangerous of it, he's an most dangerous of all, he's an anti-vaxxer, so
Kenny,
I ignore him.
You find that paper, Rapid Speciation, and study it.
Wag of the finger to you, sir. I recommend you watch H Bombers. A super hat, yeah, I can wear that. I recommend you watch H Bomber Guy's video, Flat Earth: A Measured Response, and take notes.
Also, I
hope.
Remember, we are in a wonderful era now,
and I hope nobody coughs on you.
Yeah, I'm double vaccinated, so.
Anyway, the speciation issue. It was great that you had us do this program, Lamont, because speciation is a core of one of the cores of why creationism is a pile of dingoes' kidneys, because process of speciation is extremely difficult for anti-evolutionists to wrap their heads around. And there is a distinct difference between grassroots creation. Yeah, jump in.
Really fast. Just in case, gotta say good night, Nestless, in case before you pass out on your computer.
Thank you. I will leave now. Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.
Take care, Ned. Take care, Nestle. Yeah, and I was quite serious about it. He will often pop in the video description, in the comments on my videos, and he say, "Oh, did you know about this paper and all that?" And sometimes I do, but often I don't. And that's the one thing about a network. It is impossible. There is not enough time in the day to study everything. So the more that you can interconnect with people, that you can focus on one thing and somebody else can focus on another, and then you can share it easily, that speeds up the range. You're creating the counterpart of a speciation event in our population, in the sense that we can move and adapt faster. Hey, NASA.
Right, so now talking about active speciation.
Yeah.
So are breeds or subspecies that start of it, starting subspecies or different breeds, or at the start of a species?
Yeah, the term subspecies is the more recent terminology. Recent, as in like the last century. Before that time, you would be talking about varieties, and in Darwin's day, they would be using the word race, which is why the creationists go ballistic over the fact subtitle of Darwin's book was Favored Races and their Selection in Nature and all that, and they're thinking, aha, racism. He thinks some breeds of cabbage are preferred to others. Get a grip, get an understanding of what was going on.
Even though the book never mentions humans.
Yeah, well, and for one thing, there is no point at which Darwin ever thought or claimed that the various human races were separate species. There were, however, anti-evolutionists that believed that, polygenism. And Louis Agassiz, we bring it up again in the Second Rocks book, that Louis Agassiz, who was the guy that also came up with, didn't come up with, he stole the Ice Age idea. He was an interesting, prickly character.
And
anyway,
that was a radical idea that Darwin said that in his time, because that was what a lot of scientists believed, his scientific colleagues, and he mocked them because they couldn't decide on one number of how many different races of humans there were. They disagreed on the number. And to be fair,
there was a comparable debate going on in religion, because from a religious point of view, all humans are descended from Adam, and therefore all are a single race. But racist Christians didn't like that any more than racist biologists might. And so they found all sorts of reasonings to put hierarchies of things. There's a bunch of quotes that pop up in Darwin, and to some extent Huxley and others, that just make the rounds constantly to show how racist or sexist and so forth they are. But there's been also a lot of scholarship, and especially if you read the originals, to find out, things are not quite what you're thinking they were. The really incendiary idea, not only were human beings all the same species, but originated by speciation from African apes. That was Darwin's thing. And so if there was anything to make conservative racists go ballistic in the 19th century, it was the idea not merely evolving from a lower form, but Africa? Oh, how dare you? And that's why Piltdown Man was congenial for a while in Britain because they go, oh, good. You see, we have a proper British ancestor for human beings. We don't have to worry about all those Africans. And up until the 1920s, it was possible. Ernst Haeckel, for example, he thought the human species originated in Asia. And there were already some examples of what we would now be calling Homo erectus, Java man and Peking man and all that were being discovered during that period. But after the 1920s, as Broom and others were finding all these Australopithecines, it became really hard to do that. And as that fossil record got connected up in that period, and especially after World War II, the old style of creationism that theoretically could say, okay, evolution for dinosaurs and trilobites, okay, but not for people. They can't possibly deal with it. By the time you hit World War II and the new genetics and all that, no, the same principles apply universally. And that means that the new version of creationism began to kick in, which is no evolution at all, dig your heels in. And that's lasted down to the last 15 years, which now we're in a new paradigm shift where the creationists have to accept speciation, the young Earth creationists. The intelligent designers just don't think about it, so they're off in denial land. And the young Earth creationists have had to accept plate tectonics too. They've got that in there. So the next fun thing for you young kids to do is to see how much more of the sciences are going to be filtered into creationism over the next 15 or 20 years. How far down the road are they going to be going? The Ark Encounter already has accepted huge swaths of evolution that would have been rejected in Dwayne Gish's day 25 years ago.
Last time I've heard, I might be wrong about this, but I think the last new argument I heard about with the YC speciation stuff was the Murray Schweitzer stuff. That's the new thing I've heard about like 10 years ago.
Oh, well, that actually doesn't involve speciation. It just involves tissue preservation.
But still,
yeah. But speciation is right in amok with kinds. And as I pointed out on my own channel and others, and we try to allude to it in the Rocks book, that if the didn't have the damn flood to worry about, they'd have an easy peasy time of it. They could just have God make every species separate and make it easy there without any difficulty. But because the Ark has limited booking space, they got to figure out how to get a limited number of kinds on the Ark. And so if you look back at guesstimations of the number of kinds back in the 1990s or so, the numbers got really high. They were pushing into the 50, 80,000 range, which is just a lot of kinds. But the moment you try to figure out where you're going to stick them in the Ark, they have brain farts. So the Ark Encounter has reduced that to only 1,500 kinds. But now that means another bottleneck, because now they got to explain the fossil species and the existing species from those 1,500. That's a stretch.
But the Ark Encounter also showed how they put them all in the Ark too. You see, God turned them all into stuffed animals.
Yeah,
for a year, and then after the years off, God made real animals again, because all the animals in the Ark Encounter are stuffed. So that means
for a God miracles, that would be possible. That instead of actually having to have koala bears come from Australia, he could just magically generate a koala bear stuffed animal, keep it there, packed up like cordwood, and then when it's done, magically transform it into a thing, into a living one, and then magically teleport it to Australia. It solves the problem. It sounds ridiculous, but still, at least it would do it. So yeah, let's go for the miracle here. Hear that, Kenny?
Yeah, I would love Kenny to explain how vaccines brainwash people to believing the Earth is round. Please explain the mechanism of that.
And what's poor Kenny's excuse for being a dumbass without the vaccine?
But yeah, but
well, if somebody tells you that you've been brainwashed, that means they're trying to brainwash you. That's been my experience.
Yeah. And the reason I brought up that monobarum thing, and I'll spell it MONO, BARAMIN, monobarum. That's the creationist terminology for natural lineages within a kind. So the horse sequence is theoretically a monobaramin. In other words, all those fossil horses are related by natural evolution. The very thing that Duane Gish would have said was impossible, Henry Morris would have said was impossible. And so the issue is, how big can the baramins get? The fewer baramins you have, and the more monobaramins you allow, the fewer animals you need on the ark. But you still got the chronology to work out, and it's all a mess. And all of this stuff is just so far removed from the data field that we saw in the paper Nestle put up. And if you check the various papers that I put the links to, that Vandalia has put up and all that, I have a ton of technical papers on speciation in my bibliography, and I just had to go through, and he asked me, oh, what would be an interesting set of things just to drop? That wasn't even all the papers on incipient speciation. That was just kind of a thing. I go, yeah, that one in there. I wanted to pick stuff that was easily accessible. But I don't think poor old Kenny, who can't figure out the shape of the earth, or Nephilim Free, who can't figure out that the Paluxy River tracks ain't humans, or higher up on the food chain, your Nathaniel Jensens and John Stanfords, really are ever going to be able to come to grips with most of the data in this area, let alone persuade anybody outside of their little books.
Yeah, I agree. But hey, I'm gonna go, Vandalia. But it's been a lot of fun. But
Cool.
I'll see you guys later. Thanks for having me on, though.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that we had to pinch hit for Jackson, but
Yeah, I was hoping he'd be on.
he can't do anything about the stupid internet there. But the point is it organizes his material so clearly that even a schlub like me can at least riff off of that in terms of the presentation. But he would be much swifter with the pronunciations of the taxa names than I would be.
Yeah, on for more questions like this. Is there I don't know if you know or not, maybe if we can do this in part two, but is there a difference between the speciation? We talked about animals. Is there a difference between the speciation of animals and ones of plants and fungi?
Actually, because they're all eukaryotes, it's actually kind of the same dynamics. You do have more complicated sex lives, and as Jackson indicated in his thing on plants, you get diploids versus haploids, and it's a much more intricate dance as to how the seed systems work and all of that. But functionally, it's the same kind of a system. And from a mathematical population biology point of view, the same sort of things apply once you factor in those various variables. Where things break down, of course, are asexual organisms, where the species concept is much murkier, precisely because they exchange information through lateral gene transfer. And so that's where those kind of ecological factors can play a bit more of a role. And that's why the systematic trees that try to treat the archaebacteria and bacteria in the same way they would a sexually reproducing species can produce a murkier outcome in the analysis, because they're not operating in quite the same dynamics.
Yeah, like, because I think like with fungi, they have like three different they're like three different genders or three different chromosomes, and like I forget how.
Yeah, it's very complicated. We vertebrates have a very boring sex life. And unlike many insects, virtually never eat the heads of our sexual partners after sex.
Yeah, that would be very. And also with asexual things, like this, like in sex again here again. Have to kind of this a little bit, but like with the anyways, the we combine our genes together and make a new thing, but the other with the bacteria and stuff, or the besides gene transfers and stuff, horizontal gene transfer, they can hope for is hopefully maybe when they split off, one of them has a mutation from a new species.
Yeah, and that you can have individual populations that will then go off in new directions but not radically new directions. And that's where the long-term experiments of Lenski have been relevant, because they're measuring over decades the kind of wiggle room that individual bacterial organisms have, E. coli in this particular case. The reason why we look so different from bacteria, even though we ultimately have ancestors back then, is because endosymbiotic processes have resulted in eukaryotic cell systems with organelles and plastid modules and all sorts of things that permit a much more intricate thing where the sum of the parts is way bigger than just all the parts. And then the other factor that we always have to remember is on some of these endosymbiotic events, we can't assume that the organisms that were involved in lending the symbiotic component are ones that are still around today. So that's, I think my suspicion is that's why it's been so hard to work out exactly which bacterial group mitochondria came from, because I think it's possible that that particular individual group may have gone extinct in the couple billion years after that.
I thought we knew that, at least the closest ancestor.
Well, no, there's several candidates, but there's still debates back and forth, and even there you have the suspicion that the form, if they may have been different than the one we have now. I don't. Now, when you move over to cyanobacteria and chloroplasts, there's no debate in the scientific community. The chloroplasts are in fact cyanobacterial endosymbionts, and there's not a quibble there.
Well, it has been a few billion, at least a billion or maybe 2 billion years since that happened. So maybe some slight mutations might have happened between the mitochondria and the mitochondria.
And remember, the mitochondrial endosymbiosis is taking place before the chloroplasts develop, and cyanobacteria are kind of a new thing at the time that's occurring. And so the mitochondrial event is way farther back, and so there's a greater opportunity. My suspicion is that there was an awful lot of bacterial evolution and modification and niche partitioning and mass extinction events that were taking place in the bacterial world that are invisible in the fossil record. But that explains an awful lot of that multi-billion year windup to the things that eventually act as the springboard to multicellularity and the Cambrian explosion 500 million years ago.
Yeah, and plus once we get to the both eukaryotic parts and the multicellular parts, it's harder to do the gene transfer, horizontal gene transfer to happen.
Not impossible, but much difficult, because there's a whole bunch of barriers that are designed watch out, I use the word designed. I don't mean intentionally designed by a designer, but anyway, functioning in ways that slow that down. And there's a whole bunch of little things. But for me, we'll probably have to someday down the road tackle that as an issue. Is for me one of the most interesting questions in genetics and origin of life issues is all that plethora of error correction systems that have developed, things that have designed to minimize mutation changes between a thing and to catch when a mutation has taken place. Now, the creationist just kind of assumes that must all have been there in the get-go, but I don't necessarily think that. So I kind of been following that over the years, because it really is an interesting issue of, there's a thing called the error catastrophe level, where if your mutation rate gets too high, the thing falls apart. If it's too low, there's not enough grist for evolution going on. So how active can you be without having problems? Well, all of these error correction systems, what are the molecules involved and why can they start doing that? And at least some of the ones they keep finding are ones that do things in addition to that. And so they have roots that are going on, and to try to peel back to find out what was going on, I think an awful lot of that certainly dates back billions of years. And so in that boring period that we can't see because there's no fossils, it's just there's bacteria going on. What kind of bacteria? What's happening at the gene level? We can't do genotypings on them because they're all too far ago. And in theory, if you finally know more and more and more about the networking systems that genes, in principle, you can start working backwards to figure out what was going on in these step-by-step things in that boring multi-billion years.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, like Dan mentioned in his episode he was on, that when it comes to like multicellular multicellular creatures, horizontal gene transfer might happen, it might not, but that only matters if that happens in the cells that produce the next generation, like the gametes.
Well, like even another one that is not a universal, the thing about mitochondrial inheritance being female, that's almost always the case, but not always. That in fact, there are isolated incidents that pop up every once in a while of where the paternal mitochondria get inherited instead of the maternal. And it's really, really rare, and it'll occur in vertebrates, but once in a while, that can happen. And so in nature, in virtually everything you can think of, to everything there shall be an occasional exception.
All right. With that, unless you want to ramble on for a bit, I think we should probably end it now.
Yeah, I think we've covered the subject quite nicely. I hope Jackson will not be disappointed at our pinch hit lecture covering on there, but he gave us the raw material to work with.
Yeah,
and there's some sources going on there. So
here,
give your end tag, and we can go.
Yes, for next thing, throw a long wire to Jackson from your state to him, like a long Ethernet cable.
Yeah. We need to stretch a wire from my Wi-Fi connection from Spokane, Washington to Louisiana, and hope that nobody trips over it along the way.
Until then, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll see y'all next time.
Yep. Bye, everybody. Everybody stay safe.